that the rules be suspended. Clerk will open the roll. Mr. Calderon is asking for an aye vote. This is a procedural vote, members. This is a procedural vote. Mr. Calderon is asking for an aye vote. Ms. Waldron is asking for a no vote. Requires 41 to suspend the rules. Clerk will close the roll. Ayes 49, noes 25. The rules are suspended. Ms. Gonzalez is going to be taking up the amendments to AB 2757. Clerk will read with amendments.
Assembly Bill 2757 with amendments by Assemblymember Gonzalez.
Ms. Gonzalez on the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to amend AB 2757, the Phase-In Overtime for Agricultural Workers Act of 2016. These amendments will simply do the following. It will delay implementation of this law for 2 years from January. It makes sure that the requirements begin January 1st, 2019 and not end until January 1st, 2022. It'll clarify the applicability of all their benefits under Section 510 of the Labor Code for agricultural workers to also be delayed for 2 years, and will clarify that the governor is authorized to suspend the phase-in overtime requirements based on economic conditions starting January 1st, 2019. I respectfully ask for an aye vote on the amendments.
Seeing no discussion or debate on the amendments, and without objection, we may take a voice vote on the amendments. There is withholding of unanimous consent. We may take a roll call vote on the amendments. Clerk will open the roll. This is on the amendments. Members, the amendments to 2757. All members vote who desire to vote. The amendments. All members vote who desire to vote. Requires a majority of those present and voting. All members vote or desire to vote. On the amendments, majority present and voting. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 43, noes 26. The amendments are adopted. We're going to take up the bill in mock-up form. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 2757 by Assemblymember Gonzalez and others, an act relating to employment.
Ms. Gonzalez, you may open.
Mr. Speaker, colleagues, Assembly Bill 2757 is a simple idea. We are simply taking workers, the only hourly workers in the state of California who have not had the same equal rights as the rest of us, and allowing them to earn overtime. This bill is so reasonable. We have now suspended its implementation for 2 years and would take an additional 4 to finally, half an hour by half an hour, get farm workers on the same course as the rest of us. We've allowed the governor, just as we did in minimum wage during tough economic times, to hit the pause button. But what it does is give us that light at the end of the tunnel. Give these workers who are here today that light at the end of the tunnel, that in 6 or 8, maybe 10 years, depending on economic conditions, that they will finally have the opportunity to be treated like you, your parents, your children, any one of us who has ever worked an hourly job that's not in the fields. Historically, farm workers have been left out of equal protection under the law. And we can all talk about why that is. People want to make it some special exemption that we came about someday to recognize farm work was different. But that's not truthful. The truth is the farms were plowed by slave labor in the United States. Unpaid work, forced work. And even though we eventually freed slaves, we then had a system of sharecroppers. And slowly that was replaced. And by the way, when that happened, as we got into the 20th century and started doing things like overtime and child labor laws, the white Southern plantation owners cut a deal during the New Deal to exempt the black farm workers. And slowly, new immigrants came to take that work. We went to war. Braceros came from Mexico, like my grandfather, to take that place in the field, and they still weren't protected. Chinese immigrants. You know, my father often talks about the fact that his father returned to Michoacan and told him about this great place of America. Having worked as a bracero for a short period of time, he came back, and my father at 18 picked up his bags and said, that is what I want to do for my family. I want to take him this great place. And he'll tell you today, and he came here in the early 70s before we even had a 10-hour day. And he said, I knew within the first 3 weeks that if I continue to work 12 and 13-hour days as expected at 92 cents an hour, that I would have no family to create an American dream for, that I'd be dead. That if I didn't find my way to the packing house, by the way, the packing house steps away where the workers make overtime for their work. If I didn't find myself a way to become the driver who drove that produce to the grocery store, who, by the way, made overtime. The retail guy who sells you that produce, who makes overtime. The person who serves you at a restaurant, cooks your food, cleans up after you. If I didn't make my way out of those fields, I would die because the expectation was too much. This isn't a new idea. It's been tried and failed. It may be a failure once again. But it is absolutely the right thing to do. There are many of you who said to me, it's about timing. It's about timing. What was about timing when people thought it wasn't the right time to free the slaves? It was about timing during sharecroppers, and it was about timing in 1933 when the National Industrial Recovery Act granted collective bargaining rights to everybody except farm workers. When the National Labor Relations Act in 1935 exempted farm workers from any benefit. When the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 established all these restrictions but exempted farm workers. It wasn't the right time in 1976 when we could get to 10 hours but still couldn't treat people equally. It wasn't the right time in 2010, in 2011, and every time it's been heard on this floor. It wasn't the right time. So I ask you, you have a very clear choice here. And I ask you to ask yourself, will it ever be the right time? Will it ever be the right time to look in the face of my father and the farm workers around here just like them and say, you are finally going to be treated equally under the law? I know there's a lot of pressure, and I know there's been a lot of games about this bill. But the bottom line is, each member on this floor has to look deep in their soul. This isn't a new idea. The farms are special, but the idea is as old as the Old Testament. In Exodus 34:21, it clearly states, you shall work 6 days, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during plowing time and harvest, you shall rest.
30 seconds.
Colleagues, our farm workers in California do not have the right to rest on the seventh day. They don't have the right to spend time with their families, and they don't have the right during those tough times to earn overtime like each and every one of you have. I think the time is right to change that. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Mr. Medina, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise to offer my voice in support of AB 2575. Lobbying against this bill has been done using the argument that overtime pay for farm workers will result in farmers reducing hours for their workers because they say they can't afford to pay the extra money. At the federal level, farmers have convinced Senator Dianne Feinstein that they need some relief of immigration laws because they face a severe shortage of labor. More than a decade has passed since working with agricultural interests in creating various tailor-made immigration proposals specifically for agricultural workers to address the labor shortage. But now the agriculture lobby is arguing the exact opposite. They'd rather lay off workers than respectfully pay for overtime. The struggle of farm workers in the state of California has been long. It has been arduous. From Cesar Chavez's march from Delano to Sacramento, from Cesar Chavez's march from Sacramento to Modesto, of which I took part, the struggle today continues. Members, please join me in representing farm workers who work hard to pick our crops, and I respectfully ask for your vote on AB 2575.
Mr. Chavez, you are recognized.
I've been watching this discussion for some time here, since 4 years being on the assembly floor. And I'd just like to add some clarity and not so much the motion. The comments talking about farms being developed with slaves and sharecroppers, that's in the South. That's not what was out here in California going on here. The comment about in the 1930s, talking about putting in collective bargaining and why the farms weren't allowed to do that. You know, in the 1930s, we were an agricultural society in California, and the farms we were talking about were family farms. Families operated the farms. Talk to anybody who's been in the dairy industry. They will tell you that the cows don't know anything about Christmas. They need to be milked every day. When I hear some people talk about, you know, I made my way out of the field, I don't want to challenge a lot of you from the urban areas, but I like to say, how many of you actually worked in the fields? I picked grapes with my family in Fresno when I was 7 years old. I worked my way through Chico State, knocking almonds, working in the fields. And I can tell you, you were making more than 92 cents an hour, just depicted a minute ago, about 1970, because I was doing the same thing in 1971, and we were making more than 92 cents an hour. That's an emotional pill. It sounds great, but quite frankly, it's wrong. It's not true. You know, there's amendments were made here that said, we're going to go ahead and allow this to be implemented in 2019, 2020, pushing it down. What you're essentially going to do is you're going to form all our agricultural businesses to move to other countries. Those oranges that you buy out in stores, those tangerines, many of the produce that you buy right now at Sprouts or Safeway, they're coming from other countries, because we are running our farming industry out of this state. And that's a travesty, because it's one of the largest industries we have in this state. And to further finish off the point, there's probably something no greater than having a society that not only recognizes technology and going forward in new energy, but also, I would say, also to continue to grow and provide food, not just for this state, but for the world. Go visit a farm. See what we're doing in agriculture. It's high technology now. They are forward thinking. They are figuring other ways to do this. That's all this bill does, is takes a liberal point of view from wherever you come from and tries to impress it upon the agriculture. That's not reality. I remember in 1971, when I was in North Dakota working in the wheat fields, we were out there at 5 in the morning, and we worked until about 9, 10 at night, because, as the farmers said in the Dakotas, when the sun is up, it's time to make hay, it's time to go to work. And as a college kid, I actually enjoyed it, because I could knock down more money in a month working in the wheat fields, happy to work 18 hours a day to make more money so I could go back to Chico State and get through college. Farm industry is a great industry. It's something we need to support, and we can't be bringing in these unrealistic demands that come from a manufacturing society to agriculture. I strongly recommend we do not support this. Think about it before you vote on this. Have you ever worked in a farm? Have you ever operated crops? Have you seen how it operates? This system does not work.
Mr. Gallagher, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I rise in opposition to this bill, and I do want to say I appreciate the motivation of my colleague from San Diego. Nobody denies that she has a big heart for this issue, and I know that she cares very deeply. But what I want to say to you today is that I think that that's misguided, and I think the depiction of what farm work is about is not correct. And what I want to tell you is that this bill is actually bad for family farms and for the workers who are a part of that family. And the first thing you should know is that these amendments that were just taken, there is no exemption for small family farms like my own. In my history, my legacy is in my Irish ancestors who couldn't get jobs when they got off the boat in New York because there was no Irish need apply laws. They were farmers, they were laborers, and they made their living by farming, and they worked their way to California, which was a land of opportunity, and they've worked that land for 6 generations. And the thing that my grandfather would always say, and my father carried with him as he took over the farm, is that you treat your workers fairly, you pay a man a fair wage, and we've always done that. And we've treated our workers like family. I can remember when I was a young kid, and this is one of the reasons why we have, people ask, why do we treat ag differently? I can remember as a kid, during planting and harvest season, I hardly saw my father. And at times he would come and pick me up, take me along in the pickup truck. And the thing about my dad, if you ever met him, the first thing you notice about him is his hands. They're swollen, cracked hands of a farmer who works side by side with his workers to get that crop to market. Take great pride in that. And I would go with him to irrigate with Trino. I would go with him as people were working on equipment, as Gary and Juvenal were working on the equipment, my dad right there beside him. He didn't wear a wedding ring. Couldn't wear a wedding ring. Because if it get caught in the equipment, you're going to lose that finger. The important thing is that what we do is we know there's a job to get done at planting and harvest, and we all come together, we all pitch in to get it done. It takes a lot of time. It's hard work. It's long hours. That's why we allow for longer hours before overtime reaches in for agriculture. That's why we've always done that, because we are battling time in the elements. If it hails, if there's weather at the wrong time, you could lose the entire crop. That's why you got to get that crop in, and you got to get it out when it's time to get it, when it's time to harvest. The other thing you need to know about farming is that we are price takers. We are not price setters. We don't get to set our price. I can also have another memory of when I was a young kid. It's my dad's head in those cracked and swollen hands when we almost went bankrupt because the price of rice dropped through the bottom of the floor. We almost lost the ranch, but that father worked his butt off to make sure that we saved that farm and the workers who worked on that farm. And I'm sitting on this floor and I'm standing on this floor because of my dad and his hard work and because of the workers on that farm and their hard work. And it's not just me. Our farm worker's son just started Princeton, a master's program. It's not just the farm owner's son who got opportunities because of that hard work. It's the farm worker's son who has opportunities because of that hard work. That's what family farms do in this state, day in and day out. We're planting a crop right now, a rice crop right now, that with the market price where it is right now, it won't be worth the cost of putting it in. But we're going to go do it. You want to know why? Because when in the good times, when we do have a profitable crop, we keep that money. It's a rainy day fund. It's a pretty novel concept, right? So that when the bad times come, you can keep going, and not only we can work, but everybody can work and have a job and have an opportunity. And it's because it's what we do.
30 seconds.
And without it, none of us would have a job. My family and the workers who work on it. So I just ask you to really listen to the people who are actually involved in agriculture. Listen to the people who are actually out there doing the job day in and day out. What this means for a small family farm, it's going to be very hard to make this work and to keep all of the workers that we rely on. Because this is a huge, when you talk about the minimum wage increase and then this on top of it and those razor thin margins, when I just told you we're planting a crop that is not going to go over the cost, that's pretty hard to do. We're not price setters. I'm not McDonald's. We are not McDonald's. We don't get to raise the price of the burger. We don't get to raise the price of rice.
Please conclude, Mr. Gallagher.
So I would please, there's an emotional pull here, but you need to know what the reality is out there on the farms. And in the big farms, they'll go to double shifts, which means the workers will get less hours and less money, and that'll be worse for them. Think about that before you vote on. If you would please listen, I'm asking you to please stop this bill today. Thank you.
Mr. Bonta, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, colleagues. I rise today in support of AB 2757 to provide farm workers with the same overtime pay that other workers have. And a lot of you know my story. You know my personal connection to the farm workers, and this bill is important to me for those reasons and for just straight justice reasons. The lack of overtime pay after 8 hours for farm workers should be fixed. It should have been fixed long ago, and it's something that we have an opportunity to fix today on this floor. Almost 30 years ago, California led the nation in protecting our farm workers by requiring overtime after 10 hours a day. But today, we're falling short. And again, we can correct that. Every single person that touches the food we eat receives overtime when working longer than 8 hours a day. The grocery worker, the food packer, the meat cutter, everyone gets overtime after 8 hours. Everyone, that is, except for farm workers. All of our workers in our food supply chain deserve the same rights and protections other workers have enjoyed for generations. With AB 2757, California takes a bold step towards achieving this goal. This bill has reasonable phase-in and off-ramp provisions and has taken significant and critical amendments. I'm honored to rise with my colleague from San Diego in this historic effort, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you, colleagues.
Dr. Weber, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker and members, I too rise in support of AB 2757. And I think you've heard the history of how we got to this place with regards to the unequal treatment of individuals and laborers. The first to be most unequally treated were the former slaves and then the sharecroppers in the South, who were excluded from the original bill in 1930 to have overtime as other workers had, which was a population that was predominantly African American in southern states. You know, it's interesting, my father was a sharecropper in Hope, Arkansas. My family is still a farmer in Arkansas. And when you listen to the stories of how difficult it is when folks talk about from sun up to sundown and the hard labor that's involved in terms of being a farmer and being a worker, you have to empathize and hopefully with those individuals that are there. What we've had on this floor today is two pictures of different lifestyles. One from the owner, the ones who own the farm, and their desire to continue to own the farm and to deal with the issue of their profits and their workers as well. And then you have the view of the worker, the person who has worked those fields, who knows how hard and how difficult it is to make ends meet, and the disparity between the owner of the field and the worker of the field. And obviously you're looking at the same situation from different eyes and different points of view. The reality is that we have to do likewise. We have to understand that while we are conscious of the owner, we also have to be conscious of the worker. And when we live in a society where everyone is given time and a half, then you ask why this population, why this group of people are not given the same kind of respect and dignity that others workers have. And even though we don't want to admit it, we have an image of farm workers that does not basically recognize their humanity, their desire to have their families, their desire to have overtime work, and to have even limited hours to work. We don't recognize their humanity in this process. And while they may appear to be happy workers, they're hard workers and they're difficult. And when you talk to them, whether they're sharecroppers or other, they recognize the unequal treatment that exists. As I thought about this, I thought about a movie that I love so much called A Time to Kill. And some of you remember that movie, and you remember the final statement that was made by the lawyer who talked about this young girl who had been raped and had things happen to her, and the people who killed her. And it was an African-American girl who was killed by these individuals in the town who were white. And at the end, the person said, when he gave the story of what happened, he asked the jury to close their eyes and imagine this horror. And then he said, and the girl was white, to change the picture, to change the perception. And I think if we ask ourselves the working conditions of those who are in the fields, and we think about how hard it is to work, the back-breaking work, those who are left with all kinds of ailments as a result of doing that work, and their hands that are hurting and their back, and the insecurity they have also because they're not the owners of the land, and they don't have anything to do with the land itself. But the fact that this, if you close your eyes and think of the image, and then you change the image of the farm worker from being an African American and being a Latino to your child, to your relative, your cousin, then you might have a different perspective about who we're talking about and this category of individuals that we have chosen to not get time and a half from overtime. We expect to honor everyone's dignity in this country by 40 hours a week, and acknowledging that then gives you time to earn your money and to take care of your family and live a happy life. But by not acknowledging that, we somehow or another acknowledge that there is no humanity here with regards to those individuals that may not deserve the kind of deference and support we give to others. I ask that we seriously think about what we're doing. It is a hard decision because I know it affects a lot of different groups. And I think the author has been somewhat reasonable in trying to push it out a little bit further and make some contingencies with regards to economic circumstances. But at some point, we have to recognize the fact that our farm workers are important people of our lives, and that we take advantage of the resources they bring. And everyone else who's in the agricultural business gets time and a half other than the person who's picking the crop. And they deserve the same level of respect. And I respectfully ask for your aye vote on 2757.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. Mr. McCarty, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't always get up to talk about these issues, but this is an important one for me as well. I think this is about righting a historic wrong, and this is about dignity and justice for people who work hard and want to have rules that impact them as well. As was noted by my colleague from San Diego, for too long, ag workers have had Jim Crow, back-of-the-bus type treatment. It took a long time to get water, to get shade, to get rest breaks. Of course, this used to be African Americans. Now it's a largely immigrant Latino population, and it's about power. People who don't have it get second-class treatment. And the principle of overtime is very simple. If you work hard, go the extra mile, we want to give you a little bit more. Whether it's a police officer, a janitor, someone who works in a restaurant, many times it's a choice. But for ag workers, it's not a choice. As my colleague from East Nicholas said, you have the crop to pick a certain amount of hours. If you don't pick it, first of all, the crop, it won't work for the factory or the farm, but you won't always have the job. And this morning, my wife was telling me about when she was a little girl, and she used to go with her mother to pick strawberries. And they worked long hours. She didn't go all the time, but a few days in the summer, for several summers, she went out with her. And you went many, many hours because you had to get the job done. And the protection of the extra mile for the extra work just doesn't there. And that's so fundamentally wrong in our society. Why? Because these individuals don't have the same privileges and rights as others, and it just doesn't make sense in a society like ours. And I think this is about our values, what we think in our society, and how we're going to protect and honor people who want to work. We talk too much about people who don't work. These are people who want to work, and they don't always have the choice to do so in a fair way. So I think this is a fair approach. I think the phase-in approach is one that we talked about a few months ago as well, and it makes sense for California. Thank you.
Mr. Eduardo Garcia, you are